So each of these ecosystems is incredible on its own, but together they form this heart of our planet's blue ecosystems. The sad news is, and I really need to mention this, is that they are disappearing pretty fast. We've already lost about 70% of the mangroves, 30% of the seagrasses, 85% of oyster reefs. What we want to see is that this whole market lifts up and grows as a whole, right? And that takes collaboration, that takes understanding the misalignment between developers and investors. There's often a huge mismatch in expectations. But at the core, these blue carbon projects are really about people and place, and about working with coastal communities who live in and around these ecosystems every day. Many of these projects are in areas where communities have been historically marginalized, they've been excluded from decision making, or they are unilaterally being affected by development, coastal development and pollution. Transparency builds trust, and trust builds resilience. So really, you're building the foundations of long-term success.
In this episode, I invite you to open your mind to the potential around our coastlines. It's easy to overlook the value of the soils we can't see and the life that they support. But these blue carbon ecosystems are significant right across the globe. We are losing them, and the work to restore them can be even more challenging to fund than with projects on land. This is a catch-up with Diana Denke, whom I have such an appreciation for. I'll link out to our previous episode where Diana, co-founder of Fair Carbon, helped us to break down the barriers to understanding finance around nature-based solutions. And here she returns with equally valuable insights around developing projects for restoring blue carbon ecosystems. I'm Helen Fisher. This is We Are Carbon, and I'd like to highlight a special 14-minute compilation episode that also features Diana's wisdom. Carbon builds life. It makes a great introduction to the themes that we explore through this podcast. You'll find the link for it in the description. Be sure to subscribe to keep up to date. Enjoy the conversation. Welcome back. It's so lovely to see you again, Diana, and I really appreciate that you came to us last year with what felt like a crash course in nature-based solutions. It was amazing, and it gave so much knowledge and understanding to what is very, very complicated, really. And yeah, lovely to have you back, have a catch up and dive a bit deeper into what we touched on just a little bit last time, which is the work of Fair Carbon and your focus on blue carbon. But yeah, if first you want to just offer a little recap on introducing yourself so that people have that in mind.
Sure. Thanks so much, Helen, for having me, and I really enjoyed the previous conversation as well. So I'm Diana Denke. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Fair Carbon. Fair Carbon is a Swiss-based nonprofit. We work to help protect and restore blue carbon ecosystems around the world. And we provide science-based education, capacity building, early stage funding, and policy research to support projects in this segment.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. And I want to start with that term that is so integral to your work, blue carbon ecosystems, and discover what that means. I think that on the surface, it sounds, intriguing. Blue indicates the water perhaps, but what is it really? Could you help us to visualize what are blue carbon ecosystems?
Yeah, so blue carbon ecosystem is a collective term to describe any coastal or marine ecosystem. So imagine you're standing barefoot at the edge of the ocean. To the left-hand side, there's a quiet mangrove forest or a lush green salt marsh. And then you walk into the ocean and you see a meadow of seagrass below the surface. So collectively, what are coastal and marine ecosystems, mangroves, kelp forests, salt marshes, seagrass meadows, this is what we call blue carbon ecosystems.
Wonderful. Sounds very refreshing, especially today. It's really, really hot here. I'd love to have my feet in one of those. Yeah, oh, it sounds beautiful. So, we're very specifically talking more about that region where the water is relatively shallow. Is that right? Or can it be out in the ocean as well?
Well, it can be, but it's still shallow water. So oyster reefs and coral reefs are typically included here as well. And it's important to remember that these marine habitats, they don't just support life. They have been around for centuries, and they have a very, very important role to play in our climate system as well.
So, in that regard, the reason that you're focusing on them with fair carbon is that carbon element, the role that these ecosystems play in sequestering carbon. Could you share why they're so important for that, and any other elements that you think are important to highlight about the value of these ecosystems?
Sure. So these ecosystems, they have been pulling carbon from the air and lock it away in their soils for centuries. And that's really where the name blue carbon comes from. It's carbon captured by ocean-connected ecosystems. So that helps you imagine blue, whereas, carbon captured by forest or terrestrial carbon can be called green. So many of these ecosystems are really, really superheroes for the climate. I mean, mangrove forests, for example, can store up to 10 times more carbon per hectare in the ecosystem than tropical rainforests. And often when we think about carbon sequestration, it's the Amazon, it's lush tropical rainforests that come to mind, and people jump and say, we need to save those forests to mitigate climate change. But actually, mangrove forests are a very, very important piece of that puzzle. And so are seagrasses. Seagrass covers less than 0.1% of the ocean floor, but they account for up to 11% of organic carbon buried in the ocean. So that's pretty remarkable. But despite our name emphasizing fair carbon, it's very important to say that Blue Carbon project even is not only about carbon. These are ecosystems where nature and people meet, and they have a very, very important role in many, many other ways on how they interact and impact lives of local communities and biodiversity, nature, and marine life. So mangroves, for example, they are exceptional for their ability to buffer storms and protect the millions of people who live on the coastlines from the increasing intensity of cyclones and sea level rise. Salt marshes provide nursery habitat for many of the fish and shellfish we eat, so do mangroves. So think of shrimp or crabs next time and remember where they were born and grown. And seagrass meadows also feed turtles, manatees, they support fisheries. Kelp forests offer shelter for many, many marine species in the ocean, and they are the basis of a $6 billion seaweed industry that supports millions of local fisher communities. And then oyster reefs, one oyster can filter 50 gallons per day. And so they clean the water and they protect the shorelines. And coral reefs, I think that's what most people will be more familiar with if they're snorkeling or diving, but they hold 25% of all named marine species. So 1/4 of all marine species are living in and around coral reefs, and they provide food and income to over 500 million people. So each of these ecosystems is incredible on its own, but together they form this heart of our planet's blue ecosystems. The sad news is, and I really need to mention this, is that they are disappearing pretty fast. We've already lost about 70% of the mangroves, 30% of the seagrasses, 85% of oyster reefs, and most people would probably know a lot about coral bleaching. These events are now 5 times more frequent than in the 1980s. So it's clear that if we don't do something consciously and deliberately to help protect and restore these ecosystems, the trend that we are on is not looking positive.
It's really, I think, so important that you highlighted our connection to something like the Amazon rainforest and how we feel it's tangible. We can look at information of how it's been brought down, basically. We've lost so much of it, and it can be something that people can connect to, the idea of deforestation, and also the understanding of how we can see those trees, they hold carbon, and that's a carbon store. And I think when we dig into and look under the layers and we realize, well, actually soil, we might not see it, but soil is such a huge carbon store, and all of these blue carbon ecosystems are such a integral part of that. It really kind of, as I listen through, even I feel somewhat ignorant to a lot of these ecosystems. I live in the UK and we're surrounded by coast all around us. We're an island, but I kind of don't step out on the beach and think, well, there's seagrass there, or is there an oyster reef? I wouldn't know around anything about them, and maybe awareness of this is so important because people can connect to something that's not the other side of the world. It's something that can feel more local.
Yes, and I mean, you're not alone, Helen. Most people don't even know these ecosystems exist. So I think that's pretty natural. We just simply don't talk enough about them. And yes, this is found around all the coastlines all around the world, whether it's warm water or cold water. They found you have some form of these coastal ecosystems everywhere. So perhaps the first step is just to open our eyes a bit more and look around and imagine more life exists there than what we're assuming.
Yeah, I think that is such a big part because there's something so moving about being able to connect through that sort of visualizing it and seeing it and recognizing that it's there. So I know that a big part of your work, it does lead and connect into communities, and you've highlighted the role that these play in what essentially is livelihoods. If you're, fisheries and food sources that come from these, if they're being destroyed at that devastating rate that you described, that clearly impacts communities, and you're tying that in by working with communities. So could you expand on that a little and help us to understand how you're working with communities, why you're working with communities, and what that kind of, how it all ties together?
Yeah, so community engagement is such a cornerstone of any blue carbon project. And really that is where a project starts, it begins and it continues and it ends. It needs to be something that is constantly there. So I just really want to take a step back, and this is why it's important not to dissociate carbon from the people that are working with it, because remember what these projects are really about. Yes, they protect ecosystems. Yes, they store carbon. Yes, you can claim credit on it and get financing and retire those credits and claim your benefits. But at the core, these blue carbon projects are really about people and place, and about working with coastal communities who live in and around these ecosystems every day. So I think it's very important to talk about the human side of climate action as a whole. And so what we advocate for, and we have launched something called the Blue Carbon Academy, where projects can learn about what they need to do step by step to start a blue carbon project and then eventually get accredited. One of the key aspects of this is you need to understand and engage with stakeholders around the project site, which means all the people whose lives will be impacted by that project. So it can be nonprofit organizations, institutions, local government, and the local communities that live in and around the site. And it's very important for project developers and investors to understand that this isn't a checklist item. Yes, I have done my stakeholder engagement and now I'm good. It's foundational for success. And I want to illustrate in a couple of ways why I believe that is so. So first, local wisdom is irreplaceable. Local and indigenous communities who have been living on the site for many, many years, they know the land and the sea far better than any external expert. They understand the tides, the seasons, the cultural significance of the mangroves, the coral reefs, the pressures the fisheries have been under, the pathways where freshwater once maybe have flown but got disrupted by urban coastal development. So tapping into this wisdom helps also design a project in a smarter way that is really grounded in reality and that will work not just on paper but in practice. Second, trust equals long-term success. So when people whose lives will be impacted day to day are involved in the process from the very beginning, and that means they are not just informed that here this is what's going to happen, but actually they are invited to help design the goals and understand the risks and think about how the benefits will be shared. They develop a sense of ownership. And once you have that ownership mindset, you're more likely to support and steward and defend the project over the years, as there will be inevitable hiccups and challenges and ups and downs. So what we try to advocate for is that without a really strong community buy-in, even the most technically sound project can stall or fall apart. And therefore, it's really important to take the time with it. The third point is that equity matters. I think it's important to say we cannot talk about climate solutions without talking about justice. Many of these projects are in areas where communities have been historically marginalized, they've been excluded from decision making, or they are unilaterally been affected by development, coastal development, and pollution. So imagine that you start a new project and it will impact how the land or the water is used. Maybe restoring mangroves means that the people won't be able to gather for food or fuel. These communities often cut down some of the mangroves and use it for firewood. These have real consequences on people's lives. And so part of this community engagement process is about listening, about understanding what is important for the communities and designing the project in a way that not just avoids harm, but creates real benefits for them. And then it's important to say consent is not optional when we're dealing with indigenous people or local communities. In the carbon markets, projects must follow the principles of free, prior, and informed consent, or an FPIC. And that means a community needs to make a decision about whether or not they want a project to go on free from pressure or manipulation prior to decisions being made, informed with clear, honest, accessible information, and with the power to say no anytime about their participation. So this is a sign of respect, and I think it's really the basis on which you can start building something that will be there for 20, 30, 40 years. And finally, or two small points, benefits that a project brings must be fair and transparent. So the communities need to understand clearly how the project earns revenue, who benefits from it, how it will be shared, both financial and non-financial benefits, who makes the decisions, how those decisions will evolve over time. So, transparency builds trust and trust builds resilience. So it is time consuming to engage in this way, but really, really you're building the foundations of long-term success. And this is why community engagement is not a process. It's a process. It's not a meeting. It's not a checkbox exercise. So it needs to take the time, take the humility and the cultural sensitivity to lead to a truly community-led solution. So one closing thought on this is we can't restore coastal ecosystems without restoring relationships. We need to restore our relationships to the place, to the people, to nature and one another. And this is what we believe blue carbon projects that engage deeply with communities are able to do.
It's a really interesting opportunity because I can see the distinct difference between saying, I'm going to embark on a land restoration project. There is usually a more straightforward or simpler understanding of what the ownership of that land is. It tends to be that somebody who owns the land or manages the land is very much interested in guiding that project, whereas you're talking about areas which I guess do not fall under that same kind of clear-cut ownership, but maybe they are state-owned, and therefore the people that are going to be benefiting and taking part in the project is simply not the people that own the land. So I could see that there is something wonderful about that opportunity in that, well, it takes us where we need to go, because what you've just said about it's at the heart of building relationships, so important to make sure that that's at the heart of anything really that's regenerative. So it kind of forces that, but it also complicates it. And it makes it kind of a more difficult process to get into. Have you got any observations on when these projects are started? Are there particular ecosystems that they are more common to be placed in? Is it dependent on the country? What kind of tends to be the driving force that starts a project?
Yeah, well, it's important to make the distinction that today, blue carbon is primarily mangrove forest. And there are pilot projects on seagrass that are underway, but it's way less, it's more nascent market in terms of seagrass. And of course, there is a lot of scientific research being done on kelp as well. So when I'm talking about blue carbon, in this context, I'm mostly talking about mangroves, and mangroves are between the land and the sea. And in many, many countries, yes, they are state-owned or publicly owned. There are some private lands and there are some privately owned blue carbon projects, but it's more the exception. And so then it becomes the question of, okay, even though the land is owned by the state, does the state enable private lease or community lease, and does it allow those communities or private landowners to then claim carbon rights if they start a project? And this leads us into the whole other complexity of the policy and regulatory environment around blue carbon.
So the work that you're doing is at the moment primarily focused on mangrove forests. Could you just briefly help us to understand where might they be found across the globe?
Mangroves are found all across the tropical belt, pretty much. So they love warm water and anywhere where there is interaction they need both salt water and fresh water. So they are really unique ecosystems that can withstand heavily saline waters, but they also need to be refreshed by fresh water. So actually, when we're talking about mangrove restoration, a lot of the times it's about figuring out if the site has the right hydrology that can support the growth of these ecosystems. So Southeast Asia has a lot of mangroves. In Indonesia has the largest mangrove areas globally. Malaysia, Thailand, Myanmar, Philippines, Vietnam also have them. South Asia as well, India, Bangladesh, and Sri Lanka. And then West and East Africa, Senegal, Nigeria, Ghana, Mozambique, Kenya, Madagascar, and Latin America and the Caribbean. You can think of Mexico, Colombia, Brazil, Panama, Cuba, Ecuador, Venezuela, and then some of the Pacific Islands and Australia, but also the Middle East. The United Arab Emirates, Oman, Iran, and Saudi Arabia have them.
So literally right around
the globe.
Yeah, fabulous. So that the mangroves, is there a reason that that's the focus? Are they just more viable from a looking at setting up a project to be funded via carbon credits? Mangroves have what it takes to do that.
Well, it's about the science that needs to be solid enough to then be able to, set up a market on it, because essentially we need to be able to measure how much carbon is getting stored, and then we need to be able to attribute the benefits to a certain project. So mangroves, it's still a forest, so the area which it occupies, it's clear, and it belongs to a country, and the science is very well developed, and you can tell with high confidence if you measure above ground biomass, below ground biomass, and then the soil carbon, and you use some core samples from the soil, you can tell with a pretty good confidence what is happening to carbon in those ecosystems. If you think about seagrass, it creates a different kind of problem where the seagrasses move with the currents in the ocean, and there's a lot more nuance to figuring out how exactly to appropriate the carbon. But there are pilot projects happening, so it is possible. It's just a less developed market mechanism behind it, and that means that the standards and the methodologies are still being refined.
Fantastic. So that's really clear. So the mangroves are sort of almost leading the way, and potentially the learnings and exploring how that can be more successful, that might in the future be able to feed into other ecosystems as more information emerges. So
Yes.
yeah, the mangroves are fantastic opportunities for global healing and local healing. And there's a lot of work being done on how to financially move money into these what are multi-stakeholder projects. So you've set the stage there for something that sounds really, fabulous. It's an opportunity really right across different areas of the globe. Could you help us to understand where it's at and what barriers there are to kind of scaling these projects?
Yeah, so there is a lot of interest in blue carbon, and especially, as I mentioned, they are very, very important for the carbon element, but also for biodiversity and community livelihood. So it looks like it's a win-win-win solution that we need to capitalize on, but the actual market is still very limited. Only 0.2% of credit issuances in the voluntary carbon market are going to blue carbon. And that's largely due to barriers both on the project development, so the supply, and the investment, the demand side. But if we want to break it down, we often group them into three barriers, technical barriers, financial, and policy and regulatory barriers. So just to sum up, technical barriers is where a lot of projects stall even before they begin, because developing a blue carbon project is highly technical. You need to understand the ecology of the coastline, the carbon dynamics, the methodologies are complex, and you also need to understand the generic process of what standards require for you to be able to get accredited. And that means you need to follow a predetermined path. And information on how to navigate this is pretty fragmented, hard to access, and very, very specialized. So a lot of developers end up hiring consultants to help them navigate the process. And there is a shortage of consultants or experts that have really been working excessively with blue carbon. So they're often overbooked, and this slows down the timelines and creates inefficiencies. But really, if you look at it, 80% of blue carbon restoration projects have failed in the past. And it's really important to ask why that happened, rather than just take it on a face value. And we really see that it's not a lack of good intentions. It's just because the technical foundations weren't sound enough and the project wasn't following what science is saying about blue carbon restoration. So this was largely the motivation behind why we launched the Blue Carbon Academy, because we want to democratize access to this knowledge. We want to make sure it's openly out there and reaches everyone. And yes, projects will need to work with consultants, but at least they should know what they should be working on. And we also help them find the experts that have a really stellar reputation in the market. The second problem is, I think, not blue carbon specific. It's true for a lot of nature-based projects, is that financial barriers are there. From a developer side, it's incredibly hard to get going with a project. It's very, very hard to access early stage financing. We have talked about it with you, I think, before. There are long lead times to revenue generation, sometimes 3 to 7 years. Investors are cautious, and many projects lack the financial literacy and structuring skills to know how to propose or talk to investors, and it makes their proposals harder to fund. Anecdotally, I have heard that 90% of project proposals gets rejected. So that, of course, is not very good. Then from an investor side, again, because blue carbon is so technical and there are so many uncertainties, the risks feel too high. And sometimes they are high, but sometimes it's really a perception because there isn't enough transparency or data. So when investors are looking to put money into something, they really want to get reassured, will the community support the project? Tying back, importance of buy-in. Will the government support the project long-term? Will they be there, 10 years, 20 years down the line and not change the regulation? Can the team deliver on the carbon that they claim they will sequester? And then, of course, there's a whole anxiety around reputational risk. What if something goes off the rails and the press will write about it? So even when the will is there, money often isn't. And this is because the tools, the data, and the trust are just not in place yet. And we need to build this infrastructure to enable more of these projects to benefit communities. And I just want to mention the policy and regulatory barriers, because honestly, this is also more complicated in blue carbon. First of all, regulations are not as... It's more nascent that countries started to think about how to regulate around blue carbon. And some of these regulations are constantly shifting, both globally and at country level. So it's really makes it hard to plan longer term. And we don't have a centralized information where you can just go in and figure out, okay, I want to start a project in Kenya. What do I need to know? What are the local policies and regulations? And so this really drives up due diligence timelines and costs, because each investor will need to dig and review all those risks across multiple jurisdictions. So with Fair Carbon, we want to help investors and we want to have the project, and we provide policy research on enabling conditions in every country, or not every country yet, but on the way to provide it for all blue carbon countries. And this is downloadable from our website for free. So, the barriers affect both the supply and demand. but these are solvable. And we really think that we can create science-based, socially just, and financially viable project pipeline. But we need to move the market away from heroic one-off success stories where certain conditions were present and there was a really charismatic leader or a massively large-scale project that was government-backed, to a system which enables and accelerates the many projects. And we need to create a market that works for the many, not just a few.
Yeah, that's so interesting. It's clearly the feeling that's coming through is it's complicated from that science and policy point of view, and the work that you're doing is helping people navigate that so that it's raising the opportunity for people to get started and to understand where they can find the information, what information they need to know. Clearly there's a long way to go still, and that point that you've said about there are projects that are successful, but let's not shine a light too much on them and say, because it's clearly nuanced and it's clearly situation based, and what we need is a solution that's broad and available,
and systemic and holistic.
Yes, and that's it still feels complicated, but that the attention is in the right area. And I think that's that kind of opportunity for people to connect. Like you said earlier on, these projects are about relationships, but there's also about this sort of global relationship of sharing the knowledge and access to the developments as it goes forward. Mm-hmm. Could I just ask very quickly, when you said that figure that 80% of projects have failed, are we really talking about they ran out of money?
So this is only a restoration project, okay? And it's really the this is why, when we speak about nuance, is like, it's just bizarre that often a restoration project gets money and then investor wants to show me a line item on your Excel that says this is for planting X million seedlings. And unfortunately, if a project gets money to plant mangrove tree seedlings, they will do that, right? Because they need the money. But what we say, and we say this many times in the Blue Carbon Academy, is planting is a last resort. Mangroves are a species that naturally expand if they have the right living conditions and environment. So what you need to understand first and foremost is why the mangroves have degraded on that site. I mean, first of all, is that site suitable for a mangrove forest? Maybe not. It has a very specific context, intertidal zone. It needs to be in the right intertidal zone for it to work. The second is, have we had historically mangroves here? And if yes, why aren't they here anymore? What happened? And more often than not, if you're figuring out that there may be a change in the hydrology of the site, maybe there was a coastal road being built that cut off the flow, the ocean flow into the site that has been cut off from the road. So that mangrove only gets freshwater intake, but they don't get the salt water, or the vice versa. The other side doesn't get the freshwater access anymore. You will see dieback. So understanding the ecological conditions of the site is paramount. And then what we advocate for is naturally assisted regeneration at most. So you help nature restore the site. But if you have an investor or a funder who says, here's money, I want to see you plant 10 million seedlings, you're going to just go and do that. And they're not going to survive if you haven't fixed the conditions of the site.
That to me says so much. It's this clear mismatch and lack of understanding. It's trying to say there's a one size fits all. And so you're not on the local context understanding the conditions. And then it's also saying that we can move finance if we can see it on a sheet, and we can put a number to it, and we can exchange goods. And yeah, that's that paradigm, isn't it, that really needs to change. Do you have anything else that you would like to share around what you're doing to help unearth some of this and help move the direction?
Yeah, so look, we really we define success, like fair carbon is successful if we're able to help protect and restore more of these blue carbon ecosystems and help local communities be rewarded fairly and equitably for the work that they do. And so what we want to see is that this whole market lifts up and grows as a whole, right? And that takes collaboration, that takes understanding the misalignment between developers and investors. There's often a huge mismatch in expectations. Developers want long-term partners, fair prices, they need flexibility and support for community processes, and investors often want certainty, and they want the certainty right away. They want AA plus rated projects. They want clear data, risk guarantees, large ticket sizes, large scale lands. And this simply doesn't align with the grassroots nature of a lot of these projects. So really what we work on at Fair Carbon is offer solutions for each of these misalignments. So as I mentioned, for the technical barrier, we have the Blue Carbon Academy that anyone can access. It's free of charge. We also offer service packages for projects to help navigate the complexity of all of this. On financing, we're starting the Blue Catalyst Fund, which will provide pooled early stage funding to projects that really struggle to get through that initial phase, and provide them with both the money and the expertise to then be able to connect to investors and get the carbon financing. But when we do policy research, as I mentioned, but we need to do more than this, and I really want to highlight that there is a whole plethora of players in these ecosystems that are working on solutions. There's, the Aura, who is working to bring together investors interested in the ocean, and we're a member of it. There is the Mangrove Breakthrough that is really thinking about what kind of overall country level funding mechanisms can exist to help bring more funding into mangrove, the issue of mangroves, and they've really identified some of the mangrove positive businesses that can be supported, like aquaculture or mud crabs or sustainable fisheries. Or there is the Blue Carbon Plus initiative. So there is a whole lot of solutions, and I think it's really important that we create this coherent narrative. If you care about blue carbon, this is how these solutions come together, and this is how each of them can support your project at a certain stage. It's also very important to shift from a mindset of perfectionism to a pathway thinking, and I don't want to credit, this is Jennifer Howard from Conservation International that shared this recently with us. I really loved it, where she said, projects cannot be perfect from day one. We cannot expect it from them. So we need to figure out what are the right financing structures and capacity building that help them learn, grow, and improve on a continuous basis, so that over years they can reach that level which is needed. And to do that, we need to educate investors. Many just simply don't understand the reality of early stage work, and we need to reduce fear and rebuild trust that this is possible. This is complex, but with the right mindset and the right will to collaborate and share knowledge, it is absolutely possible. And so if we can bridge that trust gap, align expectations, and build the tools that de-risk projects, we can unlock enormous benefits for the climate, biodiversity, and all these local communities.
Thank you so much. It has been an absolute pleasure to have the opportunity to catch back up with you. I've learned so much just in this time. I'm sure that other people will too. And it just feels like there's so much that's changing, not just in the work that you're doing, but in how it's connecting in all those other organizations. So that kind of leaves us hopefully on a feeling of upliftment, because the world is figuring out how to regenerate through the power of connecting all of these dots together. And I think it is in the right direction. There's a long way to go, but I think we're in the right direction. And I know that you have heaps of extra learning and other things that are available through your work. Is there anything you'd like to recommend to people that we can share specific links?
Well, visit our website. It's full of resources, www.faircarbon.org. And if you go on holiday or travel anywhere in these beautiful mangroves, make sure to book a mangrove tour. It's one of the most serene experiences to take a little boat or a canoe or a kayak and go deep into the canals and just listen to the birds and the local fauna and flora. It's gonna rejuvenate your soul.
What a wonderful tip. That sounds like fantastic advice for reconnection. And it reminds me of what you said, where, it's not about planting trees, it's about letting nature restore itself. Finding the steps that are needed to start that process of natural regeneration. And that reminds me of that, because of really connecting in and appreciating that this whole ecosystem is all part of its own health, all connected. Thank you so much. Really very much appreciate it, and best of luck with everything that you continue to do.
Thank you, Helen. And I think we need to let ourselves regenerate as well and make time to spend some time in nature.
Fabulous advice. Thank you so much.
Really appreciate it.
If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to check the description for the links to learn more and engage with the work from Diana and Fair Carbon. There's also the additional We Are Carbon conversation with Diana that you'll find there, and a link to our special 14-minute compilation, Carbon Builds Life, featuring Diana alongside Caroline Grindrod and Peter Bick. This episode is a fantastic introduction to the themes that we explore with We Are Carbon, and is a great compact piece to share with friends. Don't forget to subscribe to keep up to date. I'm Helen Fisher. This is We Are Carbon, and let's keep figuring this all out together.